Greetings, I'm Scott Usher. I'm the creative director at Havenlight Publishing, and this is Havenlight Artist Spotlight. And we're in the studio here today with Joseph Alexander Paradis. Joseph, welcome to the studio.
How's it going, Scott? Nice to be with you.
So psyched to have you here today. I love how we met, but I'm going to tell you the thing that I've come to know since I have met you, especially that first day I got to come to your house. Often people will be like, oh, this is the smartest guy in the room. And I'm going to tell you, in my mind, you are probably the smartest guy in the room for just about any room I could possibly be in. Your background is in tech. Give me a little bit of a background on you before you were doing art.
Sure, yeah. So I've been doing art since my early teens, actually, in the early 2000s,
Yep.
digital art, and was always involved in tech and computers. My background is actually IT, so I went to school for that and have a career in IT, ran a few companies in IT, and currently consult in IT. So always loved computer programming and been involved with just anything that could create and express myself through technology. I also make music and do other things. I love movies and TV, been involved in some...
You have a movie collection like nobody I know.
So I really enjoy media and being involved in that space. So, I definitely took a break for a long time with art. I was just too busy with running companies and things like that. And so in 2022, I actually couldn't sleep one night. And it was like 2 a.m, and I felt this very strong prompting. I needed to get back into art, and specifically Christian art. And it was definitely a weird prompting because it was just something that came out of nowhere. But I often listen to those promptings when they come. I know they're different than other normal promptings. This was a very specific tap on the shoulder that, Joseph, you need to go do some art. And so at 2 a.m, I started doing that. And, Peter Man of Faith, one of my first pieces, started that night, So, with my background in technology, obviously I used Photoshop and a lot of other tools, and had always been kind of a guy that did digital graphics, website stuff. So I have that background, and it's definitely assisted me to do this art, to express myself in ways that I'm good at, in ways that I do have talent in. I'm not an oil painter classically, but I'm able to convey the heartfelt message that I'm trying to share through my art. And the whole reason I got into this was to share my testimony of Jesus Christ and to make sure that when I'm putting out a piece, if I feel something, then I know someone else is going to feel something,
You're not the first person to sit in this room that's had a tap on the shoulder that says, hey, I got something for you to do.
Yeah.
And it's pretty compelling.
I appreciate that.
If you didn't respond, you probably would have been tapped again.
Possibly.
So, again, you jump into this, and through the course of all the talks we're going to do, you have a wonderful, I'm not going to call it evolution of style, but evolution of style in that you are intently creating segments of work with a look and feel to them that are unique. And it's kind of fun because, there's this block, this block, and I don't know what the next 6 blocks are.
I don't either.
Yeah,
right?
But I'll just say they're there. So we first met, which is the other thing about this whole business, which is a lot of fun. It's not this big high-end gallery lifestyle and all these other things.
Right.
We met at Costco.
We did.
Yeah. And we were there with the traveling show with another artist, Young Sung Kim.
Yep.
And you just kind of came up and said, hey, I have some stuff. Actually, no, you were even talking to Young Sung, and you said, I've got some stuff I do too, but you weren't really looking to share it right away.
It was another interesting prompting. So, so Scott and I met in a Costco, Spanish Fork Costco, and it was the day before Mother's Day, so we're coming up on almost 2 years now, and it was interesting because I went in there, I didn't even know who Young Sung Kim was. Yeah. I've seen his art, but I didn't know he was standing right behind me. Right? Yeah. So I get in there, and my daughters are picking out a Young Sung Kim piece. I saw you and you're like, hey, you should get that signed by Young Sun Kim. He's right there. I was like, what? You know, like, this is crazy. And as they're getting it signed, you were kind of standing there. I didn't know who you were, you know, at all, you know. And recently, right before that, in September, and this was May, so about 6 months later, somewhere in there, I had been doing an Instagram channel with just, I was dabbling with just throwing stuff out there, see what stuck. And, you know, I said in a joking way, I was kind of prompted to make a joke to you that, hey, I've got some art. I'd love to see my art on this wall someday.
Yeah.
And it was a joke, you know.
Yeah.
I had no idea that the next words from you were, really, let me see your art. And I showed you, and the first thing you said to me is, you know, this is really good. And I was taken aback by that. I said, really? And then you said, how would you like to be the next Havenlight artist? And I said, are you serious? You know?
Yeah.
So for me, it went from almost full circle in that moment where I had the prompting back in September, and now 6 months later, here I am with an opportunity to share this art at a larger scale. And I felt that was God's path, that God had opened that door. And because I opened my mouth and followed the prompting of the Holy Ghost to speak up, that you, and you could have said it's terrible, Joe, you know, nothing.
Yep.
But when I saw that spark in your eyes, that made me feel like, hey, I might have something here that is important. And so the rest is history. 3 days later, I signed with you guys, and been working hard ever since to put out great pieces.
I'm a little gray in the hair, but I'll tell you, throughout my entire career in the art business, which spans decades, we have never, to not look at a piece of art when somebody says, hey, I have something. I do this. Sure, a whole chunk of what you see is going to be possibly less than interesting, but the amount of interesting you see is so rewarding to that process. And I'll sit there and say, first piece of yours that you bought up was Peter Man of Faith. And give me a little bit more on that one, because that's the first one you kind of started walking on. First one I saw
that was the first one I worked on. So, you know, I've got a close relationship with the Lord, and it's always been a part of my life. I was a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, grew up Catholic. That story always resonated with me as a kid, you know, Jesus walking on water. But one of the things, I mean, my art revolves around 4 different things. 1 is color, 2 is light, 3 is perspective, and 4, and the most important, is feeling. And I always play with color, I play with light, and I play with perspective. And I can take these concepts that have been around for ages, millennia, right? And turn them up on their head and do something a little bit different. And so with Peter Man of Faith, as I was working on this and concepting, I felt like, hey, what if I flip the perspective and it's looking at Peter? Now, Peter, interestingly enough, in this piece is really far away. You know, you don't even see Peter. You can't make out his face. And it's over the shoulder of Christ. And the reason why I was feeling really strongly about that was it's the perspective of Christ, and we get to see behind Christ, maybe think about what he was doing with his face. Maybe he was smiling when Peter started to walk towards him. I felt that, what would Christ feel if someone actually took enough faith to do something different and to step towards him? I'm sure Christ was happy and shocked, maybe not, because he knows everything. But I'm sure he was proud of Peter. And I'm sure the other apostles were looking at Peter like, whoa, what are you doing? But to take that step. And so it's just this, you know, impressionist piece almost, where the person that's looking at this piece, obviously it's beautiful. It's got some green and blue colors that are more unique. I'm
going to say the greens, blues, and yellows in that first grouping of things are pretty predominant, except for the one.
And it's also a calm piece. It's not that raging storm. And that's in the scriptures, obviously. But for whatever reason, the day that I was starting this concept, I was feeling like it needs to be a calm piece and serene, have serenity. And for me, it's about taking that step of faith with the Lord, like doing the art. You know, I had to step on the water to do the art. Take that first step. I may fall in the water. Christ will be there to pick me up. And then you took a step when you said, hey, let's go. Let's do this. And I had no idea where this would go. And I'm eternally grateful for you saying, yes, this is good. We can try to spread this message that you're trying to share.
You know, and I'll just say, it's kind of what Havenlight's all about. And like I say, the tough thing isn't finding people that have heart. that have the faith, that have that.
Yeah.
It's really the tough thing's getting imagery that spreads the message, that's easily accessible, that delivers on what the feeling is.
Yeah.
So I'll sit there and say, that's common. Heart is common. Getting good art is the uncommon side.
Yeah, and I've got this saying with my art. One last thing that I kind of came up with for my own website. But what is my art about? It's about feeling. And so a lot of people say, oh, it's just a picture. And for me, if there's no feeling, then it's just a picture. But with my art, if there's no heart, then why am I doing it?
Today's episode is brought to you by Havenlight, the premier religious art dealer with curated collections to help you find your Jesus and invite more light into your home. If you've been looking for a piece of religious art, shop our curated collections at the link in the description below and use code PODCAST20 for 20% off of your order. Let's get back to today's episode.
Yep.
So for me, I don't put anything out unless I feel something. And I test every image that I do with family and friends to say, what do you think about this? How does this make you feel? And, my father-in-law, with one of my pieces, It Is Finished, is one of the new pieces in that new collection, the Our Savior collection, and he just started crying. And this man's, he's a pretty faithful guy. He's in his 70s. When you get older, you get a little bit more, soft. But
it's just the years.
But when I saw him tear up and choke up because he was feeling the Spirit, I knew that this work that I'm doing, if it can do it to him, it's going to do it to a lot of people. So for me, again, it all goes back to sharing my testimony, being a missionary every day. This is something that I can do to get my testimony out. I'm very busy with work. This is not my full-time job. This is my way of giving back to the Lord to say, if one person says, hey, what's this art about? Who's this artist? What church does he go to? Then I've done my job, if it's one time, And I know that as I'm growing, it is becoming a light to the world, and that makes me feel so good that I can give something to the world and something back to God for all that He's given me. So
the thing I was most surprised about coming into this Christian art business was the vein that it taps.
Yeah.
And to have stood in a number of different public places with artists, to have received emails, all this folks saying, the extreme, I was going to kill myself until I saw this image. But I lost my kid. This helped me get me through, my job, just all these other things, how this imagery helps me through this process.
Right.
It's incredibly rewarding in a way that I'll just sit there and say, I've seen a lot of awesome paintings of the Grand Canyon, but just haven't had anybody come up and make a statement like that about it. So like I say, it's a really neat thing. That first batch, one other piece that I'll say has resonated with a lot of people is Star in the East. Yeah. It's a nativity piece, but it isn't.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that piece, again, playing with color, blues and greens, and I kind of, in that first collection, I call it the premiere collection because it was like the premiere of me. And on my website, that's what it's called. But that collection is really, there's a lot of dark colors. There's a lot of, I start with blacks and I move out into color and light. And that one obviously is a nighttime scene, But for me, when I started doing it, the star, it wasn't supposed to be a cross. It just kind of evolved into that. And I was like, well, that's fitting. That wasn't my goal or anything. But it's just something that I felt like there is a message there for everybody, no matter what Christian denomination you are, whether you're not Christian at all. Yeah. When you see that piece, Christmas, you think about the birth of Christ. I think about the wise men using that as a guide. I think about all the people that use stars to travel, back in the old days on the sea. Just a quick tidbit about me.
They still used it in space in the 60s. I'm going to tell you.
So I actually went to BYU for 2 years studying astronomy. So I don't think I told you that. Yeah. So I've always loved the stars and everything about them. And
Space cadet.
My dream was to be, work on Hubble and take pictures. And needless to say, I changed my major to IT because the math was insane. And, but a lot of my stuff originally was about creation and the stars, cosmos, think celestial. I've always thought that way. I always think in terms of eternity, personally. My wife often, she doesn't, she's very here and now, and I'm very much, hey, someday, this is what we'll be doing or seeing or all these things. So that's an homage to my past, but it's also an homage to, the nativity.
Did you have growing up, I had a telescope near me, like a real big
we did.
telescope.
Yeah.
That first time you look through that and you really see the moon.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, like I say,
It
just
puts
is
things
a
in perspective.
That's a lifetime of just energy and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yep.
So we have this first grouping of paintings that you put together, and I really like the fact that you work in series, you work in groupings. It's a mind space that you're in for a window of time, and you're trying to accomplish something very specific with it. We have a piece that you had put in. We had trouble printing. It's now in the last group that we're going to talk about later, but I'll just sit there and say, but you have this next grouping of paintings that you bring along that are all pictures of Christ. We've got one of them in here.
Yep.
There's a particular tone that you're bringing through it, and there's a message to it. Let's talk about the next set of paintings that came along.
Sure, yeah, love to. So this piece right here is Prince of Peace.
Yep.
I guess we'll start with that since it's here. The whole thing with this one was power and peace. Mm-hmm. If you look at Jesus' eyes in this one, they're very soft, they're very inviting, but there's power behind those eyes, and there's a reverence for Christ, and he could destroy you in a second, he can save you in a second, and that's how my relationship with Christ is that way. Like, I'm not perfect, and I don't want to test Christ, but I also know the loving person that he is for me personally. And for me, it's an invitation to come unto Christ. This is actually my wife's favorite painting. And it's one of the more simpler paintings that in the collection. It's not as extravagant or as grandiose, but for some reason, this is resonating with people, and that's great. But I think right now, peace, it's called Prince of Peace for a reason, and I think it invites us to have peace. Everything going on in the world today, I worry about stuff with my kids someday. What are they going to be dealing with? I know for me, whether it's financial burdens or spiritual burdens or whatever it may be, this is the first time I've seen this printed this big, actually, and it really is something that is calming me down in this podcast right now.
Peace be with you. So
it's a good one, yeah. It's just one of these things that I wanted to capture a still moment. And a lot of these pieces that I've been noticing about what's coming out of me is there's still moments in time where it's not necessarily about the main thing going on in the name. And some of my names are differently named on purpose.
Yeah.
Because there's always multiple layers to my art. It's the obvious, of course, but to me it's the stuff underneath that's the most important and the things that I'm trying to convey. And some people get that and some people don't. And it's fine either way. But when someone comes to me and says, is this what you're trying to say here? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that's awesome. That's what drives me.
And you hit anything. I've noticed over time that people that are creating a piece of art, one, the amount of time it actually takes to make what you make is probably the amount of time it takes somebody painting a painting.
Or more sometimes.
And getting to spend all that time making this thing come to be, you're really thinking through, how is this going to happen? How am I going to have the eyes work? How are the tones and everything around it going to have that? How is that face going to have this particular look? Oh, I got to move this. That's not conveying what I got. Yeah. There's a lot of building that goes on in that process. And you get a lot of time to think, because you always get, I used to have, back when we did stuff on video, my company would make videos with artists, and I found you had artists and you had illustrators. Yeah. And an illustrator was someone that could render really well, but couldn't come in and talk about what it was that they were doing.
Right.
But an artist who kind of lives the life of what it is that they're painting. Yeah. The difference is night and day. You can see it in a second. And so, like I say, you're talking it, you're bringing that in. I think that's really cool. Now, I thought the piece that kind of kicked all this into the direction that this series was It Is Finished.
Yeah.
And that's a little more dynamic than what we have going on here through the magic of everything people are looking at it right now.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that piece?
Yeah.
So, Originally, it is finished was Christ on the cross, saying
Yeah.
it is finished, right? So you'll notice that there are no nail prints in his hands in this one or anything like that, because this is actually the work of Christ creating the earth and the creation. And I tend to go back to that because, again, it's in my heart deeply that I love the creation, the cosmos. So this is just a moment. And Jesus Christ, the Creator, in my Premier collection, is actually another almost abstract one about that same thing, where it's us behind Christ, again, behind him, because we're following him and watching him do his work. And I imagine all of us being there, being in awe of that work. Yeah. And this one is the flipping that perspective to see him and, see that he is done. And, I'm sure Christ was happy when it was done. I mean, we don't know how long it took. We know it was, 6 days in the scriptures, but I'm sure it was.
What, 6 days?
It was, exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure it was a glorious thing, to see, and to see him create the cosmos, and then it's done. And if you notice in that picture, there's a lot of like almost stars kind of going around, and it's just a similitude of, everything that he just finished. And it's a very happy painting. It's a Jesus smiling painting. Yeah. And those are very tricky, right? Yeah. They're hard to pull off because there's a reverence for Christ. But I do think Christ smiles. I do think he is pleased with us when we do what he asks. And I think in that moment he was probably smiling, and that's what I tried to capture.
You grew up in it, that kind of, I hate to say Judeo-Catholic, it's really Catholic, guilt-based, heavy-duty artwork that's lots of blood and, wow, all this stuff.
I'm not really a fan of that, to be honest.
And when I first came out here, a couple decades ago, encountered a painting of Christ giving a kid a piggyback ride, and he's smiling, and the kid's smiling.
You don't see that in the Catholic world.
Oh, and I was just like, that guy doesn't smile. And so, like I say, it's great to see all this. So, nice little segue into Have Joy, which is just kind of that whole point, relationship with Christ. Have joy.
Yeah, actually, that one is, again, Jesus smiling. But it's a little bit like, Prince of Peace, but it's one where he's sitting, on a table, and I just picture what he was looking at in that. Was he looking at the disciples doing what they're supposed to be doing? Was he looking at the person he just healed with a miracle and watching them walk away because they couldn't walk for 30 years? I imagine a Christ that was happy and that was full of joy, and he tells us to have joy. And for me in my life, I've had a lot of things happen in my life that were challenging, and it always comforts me to think of a Christ that is joyful. And that painting is actually for me. It's a reminder to myself to have joy. Yeah, it's almost a commandment to myself, like no matter what's going on. I went through a divorce a few years back. That was the worst thing I'd been through since I lost my son. So I did have a son that passed as well, and those two things in my life were not planned. They weren't expected. When you get married forever. Yeah. I grew up, in Catholic. My parents got divorced. It was a big deal. Yeah. And for me, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, getting sealed in the temple, it was really important to me that never end. And it did. And it really affected me. It was something that I never thought would happen to me. And then I got remarried, and I met an amazing person that is my best friend and who supports me in different ways and uplifts me and is a true partner. And for me, having joy is gratitude for those blessings. And in a way, it's like Job, where, he had everything going well, and then he lost everything, but then he had even more. Yeah. And he never gave up faith. And so I love Job, and I just love, that painting. And I just had a friend purchase this off my website, and I didn't know about this about him, but he's a good friend of mine, and he's like, I have to have that painting. And I said, okay, no problem. Why? And he said, my brother committed suicide, and I have a picture of my brother that looks just like this pose. And as soon as I saw it, it reminded me of my brother, and I feel close to him because of this painting. And I said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I mean, I'd heard that. I knew that had happened to his family, but I'd never really talked to him about that. So,
circling back to what this type of artwork delivers, and that idea of you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool if you ain't coming from a real spot. Yeah. How often you'll see it more as you go through it, but I'll just say again, people are like, I know nothing about art. And I sit to say, everything you need to know about artwork.
Yeah.
Because you live in this world, you have senses, you have all these things, and most importantly, this speaks to me or it does not.
Yeah.
And if it does not, doesn't mean it's good art or bad art. It says this art doesn't talk to you. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And that you can create something, like I say, that you have to be coming from a real place to create that and make that happen, because you just can't fake it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like and there's a lot of pieces that I make, but I'll work on, and I'm like, this isn't doing it, and it's okay. You know, it's very difficult to get a final product that you feel and that you know. You know, again, back to that motto I have is if there is no feeling, there's only a picture. But where there's heart, there is art. And that's something I came up with, because that's the way I feel. If there's an emotion, a positive emotion that I'm conveying through art, that's why I'm doing this. And I've had a lot of good feedback. And it's interesting, a lot of different people have different emotions for different pieces, even the same piece, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, I feel like maybe I'm helping people heal. You know, because for me, another reason why I started doing art is it's therapeutic. Being able to create something from scratch and have this vision in your mind and then have it come to fruition and then produce it and get it out there, to me, that is very fulfilling.
I want to thank you for joining us today on Havenlight Artist Spotlight. I'm Scott Usher, Creative Director here at Havenlight, and I want to remind you that if you use the code PODCAST20 to purchase anything that we have of Joseph Alexander Paradis artwork, you'll get 20% off of our website at Havenlight. Thanks for joining us today.